Hi, I'm Machiavelli, and I'd still wreck Thorin at Quake, and I'm welcoming you to Thorin's YouTube channel.
Right, I'm here for another episode of Reflections, and this one is going to be with Rapha, who is obviously a veteran Quake dueler, and I mean, I don't even actually know how many times you've been on the series. Normally I go like, it's a return guest. I think you might even have done like 3 of these or whatever. We've obviously done a million because we even used to work for the same team many moons ago. So even if the series wasn't called Reflections back then, I've no doubt done many interviews. So obviously Rafa's back, but crucially, as I was talking to him before the interview, the last interview we did actually was basically at the very beginning of Quake Champions. So we hadn't had the whole Quake Pro League and all the back and forth. Obviously you hadn't had all the extra championships you'd won. So I feel like there's still a lot we can get into. It's not just going to be, so that cooler, he was tricky to play. We've done all those ones, we've done all the classic big picture ones. How are you doing in general anyway? How are you?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good. Obviously wish there was still QPL this year and all that, but aside from that, as far as life is concerned right now, I'm doing pretty good, man. Thanks for asking.
I thought what we could do is I will do a few, since it's called Reflections, questions that could have been fodder for the past episodes. But obviously you're at a different place in your life. So I thought a cool thing I could ask was, when I did my interviews with you back in the day in QuakeLive and in the early days of later games, etc., one thing that you often mentioned, even though you weren't famous for it, was technically you did go to some Quake 3 and Quake 4 tournaments. It's just at the time you weren't super famous, so people didn't remember back then. And it's only like in retrospect that if someone looks it up, they're going to go, oh, it is actually rough there. Like famously you said you went to that one that was the sort of the last Quake 3 one at CPL, if people remember the one where it was like Cooler versus Jibbo and the fight, CZM versus Jibbo, and they had Cooler there. Remember that one? People remember that one. And then obviously Quake 4, when that circuit was going on, you went to a couple of the VSGs. Here's the question I would ask you, Rapha, is if someone went back now, I doubt they're going to, so it's just a hypothetical. If someone went back now and they watched those games, obviously this is not the Rapha they're going to think of now, but would they see the genesis of some of your style if they were to watch? Do you think you'd have some elements of the person we've seen and know now? Yeah,
I think so. I think like a big thing from what I was evolving from as a player was, the famous quote that I have of the being, steps ahead. You see glimpses of it within the game, and it's something that I had to balance out more. And that's something that 04 pointed out to me, early on, was that, yes, like some things are working, but it's in the long run, is it what's going to be successful? In terms of, he would say that I was playing too cute. And what that would mean at the time is, yes, sometimes I would have these super sick, hard reads on players for traps or certain situations, but then there'd be a time or two where if that doesn't work out, you lose the whole map because of it. And it kind of stunts your development as a player to be able to win, like when you're not playing at your best. So I think you see glimpses of that. But yeah, no, that time that you mentioned, what was it, CPL Winter 2006? I think it was still in high school at that time.
Right.
Yeah, I actually had to fake being sick to go and make it to the events. Yeah, and it was pretty cool. My dad wanted to go but couldn't, and so my grandpa actually drove me down all the way to Dallas and was with me at that event, and he'd never been around it before. Right. And there was something really eye-opening for him, and I really appreciate that he at least got to go to something, that I've been able to play in. But yeah, that event itself was monumental in terms of, I think, launching my confidence that I have the potential to do it, because I played some players who at that time were pretty good, and then also he wasn't as good in Quake 3, but in Quake 4 at that time, Lost Cause was at the top of the game. Yeah. He was really, really good. And that was I think it was my match to break it into the top 12 or top 16 was to play him. It was in the lower bracket, and I managed to pull out in a super, super close series against him. And then, so that was obviously a confidence booster in the sense of, okay, players that are playing smart, that are, pretty good at Quake 4 at the moment, I am improving, and on LAN, I'm showing that I can have the potential, as well as, and I'm really thankful for Paul for doing this, because it was not always this way. If you asked people that were better than you for warm-up games and stuff, usually they would say no.
They would go CZM. So CZM was actually willing to play. He was the best player at the time, right?
Yes, and we played a few warm-up matches. I think it was before he played. It was either before he played Cooler or before he played Jibo the first time. And we played a few maps that he thought he would play against them. So not Aerowalk. Right. We wanted to practice the others. And it was practice, but I managed to take No DM9, which was like the refurbished Lost World, from him in practice. And he obviously went to win the tournament. So I was like, okay, this is a good like stepping stone. Yes, like I failed against who did I lose to? I think it was Clock. I think Clock beat me and got into top 8 for that tournament. Shout outs to Mark. We'd end up being like teammates later, but yeah, it was a huge stepping stone. And then I think the whole Quake 4 in 2007, like I knew going into it, I was already a year and a half behind everybody. I didn't have a computer for a while that could even run the game. And then when I finally did get one, I was lucky to get 90 FPS. And by that time, with Q4 Max, you could get to 120, 125 FPS. So I was playing on like, limited hardware, a not so great cable connection, and I was just trying to see what I could do and get the chance to prove myself, because I finally could practice. I went years, like throughout almost my entire high school tenure, like I couldn't play unless I visited my dad, and that was only a couple weeks out of the year. And my mom essentially was like, okay, you have like a year and a half to see what you can do, and if you can prove that you can do something for yourself, then I'll support it. And if not, then you'll have to, find something else. And well, we know how that all worked out. So.
Sure, indeed, you're here. So yeah. Right, I would ask you this question. I'm actually just not familiar with this. Has your dad actually ever been to any of the tournaments? Have you ever been to like a Quakecon or anything that you won?
Well, my dad passed away in 2007.
Right.
Yep. But he took me
just
to
before
QuakeCon.
then, just before you got good, basically, right?
Yep. Yeah, and he took me to QuakeCon. Was it 2002 was the first I ever went to?
Oh, you said you went to a really early one, maybe 2003 or something, I think you said,
yeah,
right?
2002 was like my first kind of... I'd probably only been playing Quake 3 for maybe a month or two before that.
And I'm guessing you're like 12 years
old
old or something at the time, right? You must be pretty young at this point.
Mm-hmm. Like maybe 13 or 14.
Right.
Yeah, and then... but that's around the time where I started to learn that, these guys have been playing these competitions for the last couple of years, and started to get the history of it. And that's why, like, leading up to the event was the famous match between, it was a revenge match for Fatality against 04, because 04 had been winning. Yeah. Yes. And oddly enough, there was like, I even remember it to this day, like how they had the computer set up, and then there was this like velvet, like rope that like kind of kept them separated.
Okay.
And I stood right behind 04 for that match and watched him play. He was my favorite from being introduced to like what the pros were at the time and their play style. And then, oddly enough, then he ends up being my mentor, years later when he comes back to the game after he took like, a 3 to 4 year break because of college. But yeah, so I've been around for a while, just for like probably the first 6 years. I didn't really get to do anything. I just didn't have the opportunity to. So.
Thing is, though, I imagine in a way that probably did give you sort of like a crazy motivation when you did get the computer and you could compete, though. But you were raring to go, right?
Oh, yeah. I just, the same competitive drive I got out of playing sports, I really found in competing in Quake, whether it would be my favorite team mode back then was CTF, but then also, duel. I loved playing duel, and duel was something that I could, work on by myself. And yeah, I don't know. I just felt like, I don't know how to explain it. I felt like as good as everybody was and how much I respected their game, that I had a little something different that I could bring to the table. And I think a lot of it was, an idol of mine growing up was Peyton Manning. And, so watching Peyton Manning and obviously, Tom Brady growing up in that era and seeing that, showing how much studying the game itself and your opponents really makes a difference. And especially with how Peyton Manning revolutionized, I think, offensive football at that time in terms of the, essentially the 2-minute drill, but the whole game.
Yes.
You're playing the high-speed tempo the whole time because you've done the homework and you're ahead of your opponent. You're reading what they do and constantly trying to make the right call. And I felt like I could kind of do something similar within the game. I felt like watching these players, like I was like, you know what? They're leaving a little bit on the table, like, yes, they have a weakness here or two, but there's sometimes they could play even better and even faster, even more consistent, and they're not leaving it there, and maybe I can do it. And, like I said, through those tournaments from like 2006 to 2007, especially that Quake 4 era that I got to play in, it wasn't so much about at that point trying to win. It was about trying to learn how to play a new style of game and learn how to change myself to what I needed to be from the ground up. And then all that experience that I got that year, once the community went back to Quake 3 because ESWC picked it up after WSVG died, it was just something just clicked then. Like because I think it's because Quake 4 at that time was faster, and then going back to Quake 3, and that's what I had loved to play anyway. There was just a huge jump in my game awareness, game sense, and it just catapulted me into the potential for, setting myself up for success, and then going through the hurdles of the, couple early tournament failures in 2008, but really sticking with it and being humble and learning from my mistakes.
The reason I asked the question about your dad, I actually wasn't aware that he passed away before you even had your career, etc. Because I've always heard the story just about how he was the kind of the way you got started in the game, because he could go and play at his house, right? Obviously, I don't want to be maudlin or, for that matter, saccharine and seem like I'm just using this as an angle. But genuinely, in your case, I would like to know actually. It's kind of a bit wild though that he never got to see all this career though. I feel like it would have been an awesome kind of like chapter in the story, right? And I know in your case you are a spiritual person. Are you one of these people who believes, for example, like he's looking down on you? Do you have that do you have that kind of perception? I don't want to make it exploitative. You tell me what you're comfortable saying.
It's okay. To give some examples, like during the period where I wasn't able to play as much, and Clock had told me this later, and a few other players had confirmed it, because my dad was actually pretty good. He wasn't a good dueler, but he was good at Rocket Arena and CTF. He played in like the high level pickups a lot, and he would he would apparently tell them, "You just wait. He's really going to be something," and they would be like, "Yeah, sure.
Okay, sure.
You're just his dad.
Sure.
Blah blah blah." And but no, they told me that later, and when we're talking about him and stuff and reminiscing a bit, and I think that's why QuakeCon 2009, that win, especially with it being going down 0-2 and putting it all out in the line and coming back and it being the first one, it was really hard not to cry. It really was. It was super emotional, because years before he had seen the potential in me and supported me in it. He wanted to see me pursue something that I love to do and hopefully be the best at it. Because long story short, my uncle, who died when I was, how old was I? I was like 5 or 6. He had the potential to be a world-class golfer, and he threw it away due to addiction and other stuff. And before my dad met my mom, he was actually a pool hustler, and he was pretty good.
Okay.
But because of the whole family life, he had to, kind of put that to the side. But I think he saw the potential of that from his brother and himself within me for something that, you really care about. And for them, I'm really glad that I reached the level that I did.
Yeah. Right. What about one thing you said earlier? I actually thought it was quite cool where you pointed out that you did have some of the classic rapha DNA in your style at the beginning, but if anything, it's almost like that's what you relied on as your crutch. I think that's quite an interesting thing, because I know you follow some American sport. I think basketball is your game, right? It's one of the ones you follow, right? Right. I would say in basketball, one of the things I found fascinating about that as a sport is, again, a bit like Quake. If you're not an expert, if you're a casual, it can seem very reductive. You'd think it's just about who has the best field goal percentage, right? But I would actually say in the great players, I think the best quality is you can't be one-dimensional. Like, obviously everyone has the scouting report, they know what your strength is. Almost every great player, it's actually having the counters to whatever the people are going to try and do against you. I would say in Quake, like, a part of the mastery is being well-rounded, right? It's not just having something you're good at. I mean, in your case it might be game sense or decision making. I've seen a plenty of great players rely on having amazing rail or LG and just hope that wins in the game. I feel like you have to kind of be well-rounded to be a great player, right?
Yeah, I think basketball is a great example, because you see teams throughout the years that have had like a very unique style and they manage to win once. But then what do you see from the teams that become dynasties? It's the consistency and the balance, and the same thing is with Quake. I think, growing up and watching Quake 3 into Quake 4 and then being able to play QuakeLive, like, I think that's something that was really special for people. And just seeing the different play styles and personalities of people come out just by watching them. Like, once you get to know the scene, like if you took the names away just by watching the players and certain little things that they do, you could probably figure out who it is.
Yes.
You know, and I think that's something that's really special and unique. And yeah, and for me, I think part of it was I had good aim, but I didn't have the world-class level aim that everybody did. So I felt like almost everything I had to do a little bit more of the dirty work in that sense, because I couldn't rely on some of these mechanics to kind of bail me out of bad situations. So I had to really rely on setting up good situations over and over and over. And just like you said, like playing the percentages and trying to set up fights, you know, and the good example of basketball is like that documentary with Kobe about, you know, studying the shot percentages at certain points of the floor. And it's trying to do the same thing in, you know, film study and understanding players that, like, yes, they may be really good with these type of weapons and fights, but for some reason they just kind of struggle in this area of the map. So if you can try to force them in this area of the map more, keep them off balance, it really helps. And yeah, and that's why I think over the years, you know, and especially as my aim improved, and I'll get into why I think why it dropped off for a while, and then why I was able to bring it back. But I think you'll see why I started to play differently against people that I was playing. Like I didn't feel like, yes, some things in my game needed to be the same, but everybody is different. I can't just go into it expecting to play exactly the way I want to all the time and to win. Like, players are too good at that level. It's what makes them special, and you can't play into their strengths constantly. So you have to try to get a feel for who they are and how to break them. And sometimes it was about, like, to be honest, it was about boring people to death, because if you just played like super passive and you timed perfectly and you just waited for them to make a mistake, they would get impatient, but I would be ready to pounce on it. So it's not as though I couldn't play aggressive. It's just as soon as I saw the mistake, I would jump on it 100%. And then after that, just try to secure games with, you know, really secure fights and situations. But then other opponents, you know, they played better like that. Like a good example would be Kilson. Kilson is the type that is really good at playing very patient, and you can't play that way against him. And then counterintuitively, I feel like if you play super, super patient against Avik, Avik's aggression works. But oddly enough, if you play, I found that if you take the approach against certain aggressive players, that if you meet the aggression first before they can be aggressive the way they want to, then they don't know what to do, because they're not used to being put in this weird, like, middle ground or on the back foot as often, and it can really set them off balance. So yeah, and part of the reason why I had to play a little bit more defensive at the beginning of QuakeLive is because that was the era of moving from CRTs to the beginning of LCDs. And to just put into perspective now, the monitors we're playing on now that are like 500 hertz, now the QD OLED stuff that's coming out, it's pretty much CRT, if not better.
Yes.
Right? Holy cannoli. Okay, ESWC 2008 was on widescreen monitors.
If people don't know, this is like the inside baseball that at the time, for obvious reasons, because he were all the sponsors, no one could say, like, in this era, I can tell you it was the same in Counter-Strike, mate. Everyone complained about the monitors all the time. It's pretty bad, right?
At ESWC 2008, it was probably the worst I've ever played with. It was, not only was it not 4x3 at that time, which is what was being played on, it was widescreen, but it was only 60 hertz.
This would be locked as well, right?
And, yes, and on top of that, 90 millisecond response time. So even though we were on LAN, it was wild. Like your mouse was playing online.
Right.
So sometimes at some of these tournaments, it was, I think, a bit harder for me, because I liked to play with a faster sensitivity. And so the input delay really affects that.
Right.
So then I have to make my game a more simpler and just use like kind of dodging to aim. Whereas, like, as you see over the years, as like monitor technology has gotten better, computer technology, especially like through Quake Champions from the beginning of 2017 through what we have today, that was a big thing with not necessarily the monitors as much, but the computers being able to push the game to the level of consistency to play it at a really smooth level. That my mechanics have gotten better and better because I've been able to then push myself higher. So yeah, but I've had to play all sorts of different play styles over the years due to either my opponents, but also like what hardware are we playing on at the events too.
Yeah, this is actually, so I'll pick up on that thread. We'll keep the topics together. This is something I did want to ask you about, because I always used to feel bad when I basically would ask you in interviews, like, and you're not as good an aimer as them, because I've been compared to like the greatest aimers to ever play Quake, who are like, I mean, they're basically like, they're the equivalent, like the freak athlete with like the 47-inch vertical.
Oh, yeah.
Like, of course, these guys have a better real analogy. I never meant you were shit in that sense. I just meant, you know, even some of the people you might beat, like Kilson. I mean, Kilson probably had a better rail. I don't think that's really like some controversial statement. But this is something I was going to ask you about. You've sort of hinted at it there. That's actually the thing I was going to say about Quake Champions to you, mate, is like, it seems like your actual combat skills relative to the best are way higher. Like, mate, I've seen some of these matches where you have played the people I thought were the studs, where you were out aiming them. You were keeping up in all BO5s. So this is part of the reason why essentially you did always have some of this in your locker. You just couldn't show it as much in QuakeLive, maybe.
Yeah, totally agree. I think it's part of it. Two things. I think over the course of 2017, with like the setup that I was using at the time in terms of like mouse and keyboard, I think it was limiting me a little bit. And once I went into 2018, because at that time, Alienware had bought out all of the sponsorship rights for Liquid, like hardware, headsets, everything. And they knew that they were behind everybody, and they said, look, we don't expect you to use our stuff right now. Like, so use whatever you want.
Right.
And so I swapped to something that that kind of felt more intuitive to me. And thankfully that year began with 2v2. And I think that really helped in the grand scheme of that year, which was probably one of the best years I've ever had in my entire career. Because all of the combat that was necessary in that, and having to react quickly and always be on your toes, and 2v2 forces you to be good with every gun. You can't just like keep your play style down to like 3 weapons. Like, there's plenty of times where like you're the one that needs to support your teammate with whatever you got, and you have to find a way to make it work. And I think just over the course of that year of Tim and I playing 2v2, like my mechanics just got really good. Like, they still were not Claws level S, Kilson level S Cypher, but they were close. They were with like much closer in terms of like the disparity between the two, and I think you really saw it at the end of the year, like when the DreamHack winter 2018, when I won the 2v2 with Tim, and then the duel like he did the year before when we won Sacrifice and he won duel. I think if you go through and watch some of those matches, at that time, my aim was in like just fluidity through the map and movement and everything. I was playing lights out. It was probably some of the most solidly I've ever played. And then somehow in 2020 during the QPL, something just clicked again. You know, just hardware was getting a little better, so frame times were getting more consistent. And I just got a really good grasp of how time limit duels should be played with the champions and most of the metas and stuff like that. And again, focused on being very well balanced with as many champions as possible. Just how I viewed, like in QuakeLive, I need to be good at every map. It doesn't matter if I hate it, love it. I need to be able to take it from somebody, you know, in a best of 5, in a best of 7 scenario. And yeah, there was a really big time period where I think I just was playing really consistent, and it showed. I won, I think from 2020 to like early 21, I won like 3 of the tournaments in a row, which was really, really hard to do. And then even on the ending of the year when Fenger won, I managed to get top 3. And we could get into that later, but getting top 3 at that event felt like a success due to the circumstances that were going around at the time.
Right.
So, yeah.
What about, one thing I wanted to ask you about is, it's funny when you give this description of when you were once the kid watching behind 0-4, watching him play Fatality, and you're like the fan, like, hey, put me in the game, coach, sort of vibe, right? Because one thing I've always appreciated actually about your public persona, like you will admit this, is there are actually some other pros who also are like fans of top players and do understand the esports side. They're not all just like got the competitor mindset, but I always felt like you had an appreciation for the history aspect while you were competing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, but you've often gone out your way to say that you wanted to be the person with the most Quakecons, for example, or certain things that you wanted to accomplish certain feats. It wasn't just about fame and money. Like, there was an aspect of like it's your chance to be a historical figure, a dynastic figure, right?
Yeah, and I think a lot of it was due to the timing of everything. Like when I was getting the opportunity to play, and like when I joined SK in 2008, because I'd gotten to know Avec and Cypher a little bit before then, like during 2007. And then into 2008, and we were kind of the new guard at that time. Like, so, you know, we were trying to chase 0-4's 3 titles at QuakeCon, and Toxic's, how many did he win at that time? Was it 2? He had like 2 or 3 himself, like via Quake 4 and the Quad Damage tournament in 07. And, you know, QuakeLive with that fresh start and the tour and everything was just like, it was a very motivating time. It really was, to like, you know, a lot of the old players were coming back, as well as, you know, we were rising up to the cream of the crop and to see what we could do. And, you know, and as I explained it before in previous interviews, like, I always had a really friendly rivalry with Cypher and Avik, you know, and even though like I like Anton, you know, as a friend, there have been times where Anton has been more of like I've been a little more fired up to try to beat him in terms of he's what came before, and then the type of finals that we were in, right? And just the personality that he has, you know, it's always fun to go against. But as far as, you know, I just was for the QuakeCon stuff, like when Cypher and I started to like alternate our wins, if I lost and it wasn't me winning, I was like, look, I want you to be able to go do it. I want you to be able to go and to chase for it, and I'm going to catch you, you know, type thing. Like, and it was the same way. Like if he was out, like he was rooting for me against whoever I was playing against, you know. And just unfortunately, what year was he? I think 2016 he wasn't able to make it, and that is the year that I broke the odd curse on QuakeCon, where it seemed like we could only win every other year, and then I managed to win back-to-back that year. So there will always be a little bit of an asterisk there on that, but
fair enough.
Yeah, but overall, you know, I think the chasing that and what like QuakeCon meant, and especially I think the special feeling behind the world circuit for IEM, because it reminded me of, you know, I got to miss out on Painkiller because, you know, I was a little too young, didn't have computer stuff at the time. And then same with like most of Quake 4, I didn't get to do that either. So for the opportunity for us to go and do that, you qualify through your region, you try to be the best in the world. I don't know. It doesn't really get much better than that, man. Like competing, you know, to be the best at what you love. It's just, I feel really thankful and blessed that I've been able to do that. There's so many people in the world that wish that they could go after something, and just due to certain circumstances, they're not able to pursue their dreams, or just they weren't able to make it, you know. And I don't know. I just feel really thankful that I've been able to do that.
All right, I've got an angle for you on the cooler thing you just referenced there. So I know what you mean, because obviously, I mean, it's not just you. As far as I can tell, the cycle with Cooler goes, he's friendly with you at one point, but then it's when you have like a key win over him where he thinks it was lucky or he should have won or whatever, and he'll just start with either he'll get annoyed or there'll be the needle, and he famously has fallen out with people who the joke is were his friends and were friends later. So he has done that cycle, whereas I have to say you've done the opposite, because one thing I was always impressed by was somehow you would beat these guys, sometimes even humiliate them, frustrate them, and then they'd be your mate afterwards, and then they like you said, they couldn't even be mad you won. They were sort of like, yeah, we'll whatever. And I was like, how's he doing this? So I'll give you the analogy. You're going to like this one. It's actually a Michael Jordan story. People might know this story way back in the 90s. There was a famous story with Jeff Van Gundy when he was the coach of the Knicks, where he said in the papers that like Michael Jordan, the headline was that Michael Jordan's a con man, but his angle was he meant like that he befriends star players and players from other teams. And the point he was making was the difference is when Michael Jordan is like, everyone obviously wants to be Michael Jordan's friend. When he does that, the difference is Michael Jordan's still going to kill you in the game anyway, but he would get the other player to sort of like, because they were more friendly to him, like maybe not play as hard or be a bit out of it, you know, be in their head a little bit, you know. I always felt like there was a little bit of that, because I always say to all the people in Quake, the reason it's such a unique esport is it's almost like chess or something. You know, you're going to play the same 4 people in every final pretty much. So it's actually this very niche circle of people who are simultaneously like your friends and companions at the event, but then they're also the guy you're trying to beat and sort of kill and take history from, and all that, like, you know, warrior terminology we all throw up, etc. So isn't this kind of a skill of yours? Like a skill of yours is you could say, like, I would put it this way, I would always say to them, I get that you're hoping you can get something out of him, but you do know in the mind meld, he's probably winning at this, you know, like when you have these conversations about the map or what your strategy, he's probably remembering that, mate. I don't know if you're taking notes, Avik, you know, like he might seem like he's a cool guy, but sometimes I think he wins that battle too. What do you think on this? Because that's kind of a part of the game too, right? It's the game within the game and what people's perceptions are of who you are, etc.
Yeah, I think it can definitely influence some people. I think for me, And I think the Michael Jordan thing with Jeff Van Gundy is a great example, especially, and we'll talk about Cooler first, because like you said, there'd be times where he was a bit more friendly to most of the scene. And then there would be times where, like you said, it's like something was under his skin. And it was kind of like, if you watch The Last Dance, where sometimes Michael needed a little something extra to motivate himself, to fuel himself, right? So if he heard somebody was talking shit about something, blah, 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 or it would just fire him up to be even better. And I think the more that you got to know Anton, that's all it was.
Right.
He just needed something to push him to try his best so that he didn't, get lackadaisical and things like that, and then he took it super seriously. Because once you get to know, he's a funny guy, man.
Oh, of course,
he's a cool guy, man. But yeah, and once you get to know that, then you just don't really take offense to it, And as far as like being nice to everybody, yeah, like we were all, going to the same tournaments and stuff. And I just felt like I wanted to lead by example too, just as myself as a person, like kill them with kindness. Like, it's just, there's no reason to be an asshole to somebody. Like, and even if they're being an asshole to me, I don't give a shit. I'm going to be the better man. And I'm going to show that you don't need to act like that to get what you want. Like we can all get along here and we can figure this out. Right. So that's just how I went about it. And if it happened to give me a bit of an advantage, so what? But I wanted to, how I acted with everybody in the scene is I wanted to, at the end of the day, I wanted to be content with how I was. You know what I mean? Like, and yeah, so it wasn't really anything more than that in terms of like trying to be nice to get people to, be less on edge. Come tournament time, it was just me being me. So, but if other players were like that here or there, that probably has happened once or twice.
If you ever ask someone, were you the GOAT, right? It's an awkward question because they're almost compelled to say no because it sounds egotistical, even if they were. Like, the joke is, Michael Jordan's a great example of that too. The reason he on camera never says he is because you're supposed to sort of give it up to all the great players in history, and then you say, let the fans decide. But spoiler, if you get Michael Jordan in a bar, I've heard he says like 100% he's the GOAT and he thinks everyone else is gone. But that's privately, that's not on camera. He didn't choose to put that in the world. So I would ask you is this, fuck the are you the GOAT question, because again, it's like a fan question. I would just ask you this, Rapha, I think it's a better way to phrase it. In QuakeLive, when you were playing what to you was your 10 out of 10 game, you would win against anyone. True?
True.
Like, was your style particularly effective for some reason, do you think?
I think because I saw the big picture a little bit better. Just a little bit better than some other players. And when it came to, because I think the biggest thing within Quake Duel is everybody can play the first 5 minutes. The first 5 minutes is easy.
Yes.
You have the starting spawn, you have like, the normal road. You could figure out the patterns that people want to do. They're going to choose.
That's why people would always whine so much if they got the bad early spawn on the gun, isn't it? Because they thought if they'd gotten like the perfect start, the game would go out the way they imagine, right?
Yeah. But the thing is, everybody plays it all the time. And that's why, like, especially in Quake Champions, I wouldn't quit practice. I would play the entire timeout, and
okay.
most of the time I would win it, but it's like, no, like you should play the entire timeout, because if you are losing in practice, sometimes like you need to get that feeling of, I can do this. I can make this comeback happen. And what are those situations in the game which lead to that? And getting a feeling for, because it's like the same as like driving a car, right? You get the feel of the car when you accelerate, when you brake, when you turn. You know when it's turning correctly, when it's not. And the same goes like within the flow of the game as well as your opponent. Are they on tilt right now? You can kind of feel that shift within the game if they're playing more nervous, if they're on tilt, if they're gaining confidence, and how you should try to shift your game like that, But you don't get that if you play the first 5-6 minutes and you're down and you're just like, GG next. Like I hate that mentality. Like just play it out. If the guy whips your ass, the guy whips your ass for a game. It's okay. Like, and if you need to take a break between the next map, then so what? Because that's how it happens at a tournament. You don't just ready up right away. So I just have always tried to treat practice like it's going to be in the tournament, so that I'm ready for that mode all the time. So, because it's, I've always viewed it as a bit opposite of what Fatality did, because I felt Fatality needed the grinding practice. And sometimes Cooler was the same. Like before tournaments, he'd be playing almost 12 hours a day, which is just, to me, that's insane.
Yeah.
I can't do it. But it's about quality over quantity for me.
Right.
I'd rather have 2 to 4 hours of really quality practice and then review myself a bit and then review competition than burning myself out like over and over and over again on that play. Like, and the only time I'm playing more is like building stamina up right before the tournament in case there's a lower bracket run, etc.
Yes, I know exactly what you mean, by the way. Like, if people don't know, Fatality was probably the most notorious, but it was just pure grind. I believe he even used to use, like, practice partners that weren't themselves top pros, because he just needed somebody who could, like, essentially lock in a room for 14 hours and just play the guy constantly. And then similarly, yeah, on the Cooler thing, I mean, I've actually, when I used to work with SK and we shared that office with Mouse Sports, I've actually been and stayed over when Cooler's boot camp, and I can tell you, all he would do is just play Quake. Before an IEM, all he does is play duels. Like, as in, you can go to sleep, wake up, and he's still playing at, like, 4 in the morning or something, you know, when you got there at, like, 10 and you go off to sleep. So the question I would ask you is, when you say that line there, though, when you say reviewing the game, I'm guessing also another thing, I actually think you've revolutionized Quake in this sense, mate, is didn't you also kind of bring a theory aspect to the game too? As far as I know, most of those great players, they all wanted to learn and level up in the game. They wanted to play someone who's good and see what his style is and figure it out in a practice game, or just try a style en masse against randoms like I think Toxic would do. Would you actually study VODs back in the day? Were you trying to do a bit of theory stuff as well, not just pure grind?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It was always about, even as good as I felt in shape sometimes, there's something that somebody else has that I can take and add to my game.
Right.
There's something somebody is doing that's better than me. So what is it? And so I would try to watch and just see, like, even if it's like, okay, well, why is my rail not working so well on this map compared to others? And then you're watching and you're finding, oh, it seems easier for him just because of like 1 or 2 different angles, or like the way that he's dodging isn't as complicated as it looks, but it seems deceiving due to like how angles look and like how the model is, right? So just trying to learn things like that, and like sometimes like habitual patterns for other players in terms of like the weapons that they like to favor. You know, what do they like to do off spawns, etc.? What type of play style are they looking for? And then just theory crafting what I think is probably the best option to beat it. And can I obtain that or not? Like, because sometimes like during certain tournaments, I had like limitations in terms of like my mechanics. So I had to try to find unique ways to beat people. I was going to say something else. But yeah, I mean, I've done that even through all of Quake Champions. I've like reviewed my game and I've reviewed others. I think if you're just hurting yourself. Like, it's all there for you to do. Like, and if you're not doing it, it's like trying to play a sport and yet you're not going to the gym. So all the guys that are going to the gym to strength train, you know, they're going to be able to muscle you out on the courts, on the field. Like, you have to put in the work all around.
Right, there's a curiosity, so I'll throw it in now, even though it's nothing to do with Quake, which I made this point to Dahang, which is if anyone looks at the timeline of when Quake Champions came out, it's actually almost perfectly timed up with when the Overwatch League was going to begin and all the Western orgs were deciding were they going to buy a spot or were they not, or was it going to be a sports team and all that jazz. And obviously at the time you were playing with Team Liquid in Overwatch, and Team Liquid's an enormous org, obviously then and now in esports. I'm sure if they'd really wanted to, they could, like Cloud9, they could have bought a spot. And at the time, I've heard that year, it was kind of back touch and go. Teams were figuring out, do we like the proposal? Are we going to do it? So there's a timeline where, to be fair, I think if you have a look, I think already they'd announced Quake Champions, so maybe you guys already knew we're probably going to do that. But if they say there'd been a 3-month more gap and Team Liquid and show, there's an alternate history where maybe you and Dahang just play Overwatch and you're actually Overwatch pros. And if people don't know, by the way, the part that'll actually really disappoint you if you're a Quake fan is these guys weren't even the DPS or the Widowmaker. They weren't even the players. You'd want them to all Quake. We're going to be sick. No, they were all playing like, you were like a fucking, you play like Mercy and the healer and off tanks and stuff. You were playing kind of the supportive roles, right? Was this a real possibility that you could have been an Overwatch pro if they'd come in the Overwatch League thing?
Possibly. Speaking of alternative history, because they did announce the big like Quake World Championship before. It was before like the Overwatch World Cup was going to happen, before like the potential kickoff of the Overwatch League, which I think was going to be like either end of 2017 or very beginning.
Yes, I think so.
Of 2018, right? So if there was like a 3-month gap like, because QuakeCon's always in August, so if it was, if it was like late November, they announced something. At that time, like we would have been very committed to Overwatch. And then me knowing what I know, Liquid probably would have at the end of the day decided not to. But to put it into perspective, because Tim played like the flex, he played the flex support at that time. And when he was trying out for the World Cup team for the US team at that time, statistically, he actually had the highest win percentage of all the supports, no matter who he was paired with, but for some reason didn't get selected. I won't get into that, but
some politics I'm imagining.
Yeah, Tim at that time was in really, really good shape. And then as far as like us as a team, we weren't the best team, but we were on the way up. We were making the right moves as an organization in terms of like roster with the young signings that we had of Shatter and Fury, who Fury ended up winning the first like Overwatch split, I think it was, with London Spitfire or something like that. I think. So we were getting some like really talented guys and like slowly coming into our own as a team. And the results were showing like nearing like, what was it, Contenders season 0. So kind of like World Cyber Games at one point had like a season 0. I think that's the one fatality one, like 2000 or something, right? Well, we finished second in that tournament. And it was against a lot of really, really good teams. So I think, if Quake hadn't been announced and I hadn't kind of had the inkling that I wanted to pursue that again, then who knows? I possibly could have continued with the team, and if we would have stayed together, then played Overwatch, and then at that point you're committed, right? So then I would have stayed there, and then who knows what would have happened with me potentially playing Quake Champions down the line, or if it would have happened at all. So.
Because then to me, there's a similar follow-on question that's about Quake Champions. It's the same story because it's the same with you and Dag again, which is obviously you guys loved the sacrifice mode. You clearly thought this was dope. Like if there's a world where, look, sadly, this is a famous refrain in Quake, like every CTF and TDM player would say the same thing, which is our mode was just never the esports mode. It was always 1v1 duel for obvious reasons, right? If there'd been a world where, I know they did for the first year or two, but if there'd been a world where sacrifice really was, again, alternate history, that's what we play instead of 1v1 duel. It's just sacrifice 2v2. Like you would have been up for this, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think in 2017, especially because we came so close in Overwatch, I was so motivated for the team stuff going 2017 and 2018, like because as you look at it, like almost all of my career in QuakeLive was duel. I had a few team wins here or there. Tim had like the majority of them through EG. But I was just so motivated with Sacrifice, and to be honest, Sacrifice, like Tim has said, and I agree with it 100%. It's the most fun esports mode I've ever played.
What's the hook? If someone already knows duel or TDM, what's the hook of Sacrifice?
So compared to CTF, where you have kind of set positions, right? You have a flag defender, you have like a flex D, and then you have 2 offensive people. Sacrifice is this. Yes, you had to play different champions and you could only play one of each on your team, but everybody is kind of playing like that figure 8 style in soccer in terms of there aren't set positions, but everybody's playing every role. And there's always constant action. There's so much responsibility and so much potential for you to make big plays all the time. And after coming off of playing support for the last 6 months, and being limited in that role, like being able to feel that impact that I had like all the time was super addicting. And it really motivated us after the World Championship where 2Z won. So I think it was Claus, Hran, Latromi, and Silencep. There were 2 more left in the year, and we just dedicated ourselves to, we're accepting nothing less than first. That was our goal, was to win out the year so that we could say, okay, at the end of the year, no matter what the mode is for next year, like we finished out on top. And yeah, I was definitely more motivated for the team play than I was for duel. But I think that was only because of the amount of duel that I had played before.
Understandable.
Yeah, because even though I like time limit duel and Quake Champions more than round, it's not as though I wasn't motivated to win those in the beginning. I was. I think the circumstances as to why I was finishing a little below what was expected for a while was just due to I don't think that I was playing mechanically as well as I needed to sometimes. And then there were some matches that I had where people played the games of their lives. And
Right.
the thing is, I always try to have my play style of you're playing to be beaten, not to lose. You want to do everything you can so that the opponent has to pull off amazing shit to beat you,
Right.
and so that you could tip your head off to them, not so that like you feel with this constant regret that I dropped so many situations, blah blah blah. No, there were some really key matches where like guys pulled off amazing plays against me, and they were super close games, and I just didn't clutch it out, and they did, and so the key was for me to just not get down about it and to just be like, okay, well, I've been here before and I'm going to do it again. What do I need to do? Like, do I need to change anything? And just stick to what I know that will lead to success, and it will eventually come, and to not worry about it.
I mean, this sort of feeds back into the earlier question about like leveling up the combat skills and making your aims more impactful and stuff. In those first times, obviously, another classic thing about Quake is, even though the really brilliant players can usually nearly always adapt to the new duel, sometimes they're not the top player. Obviously, certain games do suit, maybe Quake 4 did suit Toxic more than QuakeLive or whatever. You'd have to ask him, So I'm sure people do have preferences. Was there ever any worries early on in Quake Champions? Like, maybe I'm just not going to be the top dog. Like, would it have been okay to still be someone who has placings in the occasional run? Was it important to your identity to be number one?
Well, I'm always shooting for first, Thorin. So I think that answers that. I think in the long term, it wouldn't have set okay with me to keep finishing. I would have been very upset with myself. Not like blamed it on other people or other players, like that they're getting lucky and stuff. No, it would have just come down to myself, and yeah. I don't know. I knew that I still had the potential to do that, and I just had to find like what would bring that out of me again to be able to achieve that. And yeah, so, and I think that definitely showed in 2018, like how the results went in 2017, and then how I changed. I think just little things like mentally, in terms of mental focus, the type of training I was doing that I felt I needed for the style of Quake Champions and whatnot, like really led to the success that year.
Even from the first event when you won that PGL tournament, I'm sure when you haven't won in a new game, and I'm sure in scrims you have times that you beat all the best players, it's still a big deal to break through and lift the trophy, right?
Oh, it was. That was such a special trophy for me, because I think at that time, everybody showed up to that event. There were a couple events where like some people showed up, some people didn't, but everybody was there, and thankfully it was like a month or two after QuakeCon, and it was just a duel tournament. So it was a nice shift of playing mostly 2v2 into just focusing on this going into it. And I think for me, as far as like my growth in terms of even being more well-rounded, was because oddly enough, before that tournament, the way that Death Knight was that patch, and I had been playing in practice, I had been banning him like 80 to 90% of the time. And I was like, I'm just going to ban this broken champ for this tournament. But then once we got to the LAN, yes, online, the style was pretty similar, but we saw once we got to the LAN that a certain few players could actually play Nyx on LAN, whereas online, she was not very viable.
Oh, right.
The same with like, there were a couple other champs where like I was really, really good with. At that time, I was really good with Keel. And there was only like one other player playing Keel at that time. So I was like, okay, well, depending on the player, I need to not set that limit for myself. I need to be more flexible and leave it open. And it ended up working out because I feel like at that time with play styles, there were certain players that played around the abilities better. And there were certain players that mechanically were playing the game better in terms of their base game. And the example, like with the bracket that I got, I felt that like, because in the quarters I had to play Sirius, and then I had to play Claws, and then I had to play Cooler. I think that's how it went for that tournament.
I think so.
And Sirius and Claws, their aim, literally the two best aimers in the world.
Right.
But their one downfall is like sometimes holding on to their abilities too long or just misusing them in certain situations. And I was like, well, based off of watching them, I'm going to leave this broken champion here and I'm going to see what happens. And it's not as though I won every round with that champ. Like I had to play, all sorts of different champs throughout the set, but allowing myself to not put myself in a little box like that, and be more flexible really helped, and I really showed the type of game that I should have been playing for like the past like year and a half. But as well, it's partly because the game was slowly getting more balanced. It was becoming less about one random aim fight, and it was becoming about, even within the rounds itself, like more consistent play. And I do think that did help me, like, because over the long term, like with positive expected value, that's pretty much how I play, and then just play off of gut decisions here or there to spice things up, right? But overall, I think like the more balanced the game got, and the more I could show that I can play like everything, and it's not just who's the best at these two champs or these three champs. It really allowed me to shine through. And then and then that year, I don't know what it was about EU, because in the previous year, it seemed like EU players were a little bit more willing to experiment with champs that were kind of out of the meta and to try to become really good with them. But then in 2018, it was definitely the Americas were showing that we were willing to kind of step outside the box a bit, and EU was playing a much more like, this seems to be the meta, we're sticking with this. And I, just like the mentality I had with the hang in 2v2, I was like, dude, I don't ever want it to be like an Overwatch where, a team is too afraid to play what they think can work when the meta changes all the time. And then you see a team play this unique strategy and it works out great because they just weren't afraid to do it, right? If you feel like you have the confidence to play it at the best, like, you should be doing it. And that worked out for me with Athena at the final tournament of that year. I played her so well, and honestly, I probably should not have played her against Sparty, but I played her so well against Sparty that I think Cooler was watching behind me and I didn't see it. And everybody found out. And so I never got to play her again.
You should have saved it for some other time, right?
But not being able to play her opened up like one or two other champs that everybody had been banning. So it just allowed me to be more versatile against everybody going through that bracket. And I think you could see that as well, even in the finals against Avec. Like, Slash wasn't being played as much at the time, but I took the gamble to play her on Blood Run, and it worked out to perfection, and just sticking to my guns and playing what I think, at that time that I felt I could push to the limit regardless of what others were playing.
That's why it's so interesting to me that in the early days, you weren't the number one players. Because I agree with you. As soon as I saw that round format, I was like, this is almost like someone cynically made like the ultimate rapha format. This is how he plays Quake anyway. He already sets up for like the ideal scenario. And if he doesn't get it, I've always thought essentially, it's actually how, if people don't know how real sports betting goes, essentially, I know some people who do sports betting for a living. And what they tell me is the real secret is, because there's so many potential games to bet on, you just don't bet on the ones where the odds aren't the right odds and you don't think it makes sense. Like, you just look for the right angles essentially that make sense, and then you commit to those. So I always thought that was like a big part of your game. So if anything, it was the others that like the time limit style, because then they can get back into a game, they can have the messy 2 minutes where they just run and get spawn fragged. Your style was always like looking for the perfect one set, but I guess there's also an angle to some degree. I also did worry, like, isn't this going to teach the others how to play that style too? Like, did you ever wonder what would happen if we just stayed with the round-based format? Would that have actually also suited you in the long run, do you think?
I think overall time limit was better for my style, but I still think I would have done extremely well in round, like, just like we saw with the progression of like my placements in 2018. That's not as though to say I was going to wipe the table and win every tournament. You're always going to have some tournament at some point where somebody plays amazing and they win, as we see through the years. As good as I've been, I'm not able to win every time, even though it's my goal to do so. Everybody in the top 8 is going there to win. Like, nobody's trying to just have a good placement. But I think it was just so round was getting more fun. To be honest, it wasn't as fun in the beginning because it was like this weird gambly play style with the way the abilities were at the time.
Yes.
As well as sometimes, depending on the patch, certain hitboxes were off, so trying to shoot certain champions was really annoying. So counting on hit registry was, that was a gamble in itself. But the more that the game like smoothed out and more champions were able to be played, it was getting more fun. But it did have a severe problem. The rounds and the matches could last way too long.
Yes.
And we saw that multiple times at like 2 tournaments in a row where like if you get into the best of 5 area and these guys go the distance and everybody's playing with scared money, just like when you watch like, football matches and then people are playing more passive and they're just passing the ball rather than like going for those, gambles that they do in league play, right? That these matches go on way too long. Like look at it in QuakeLive, you have 10-minute matches and we could play a best of 5 in 50 minutes.
Yes.
Dude, we could get through 2 maps in a best of 5 in round duel, and if you went the distance, not including overtime, it was 50 minutes.
Oh, there was some nightmare games I remember where, for example, people just abused like going invisible and just escape, and and a kill just never happens. Every time you feel like there's a kill about to happen, it would just dissolve back into a stalemate.
Yeah, and because it's like it brought a bit of nice tension because lives mattered more, but it also sometimes created this really toxic, super passive defensive environment. And you're right, there were certain champions in certain patches where it was so easy to play like that, and it just was not good, I think, for the game overall. But whereas like when you went to time limit, yes, we've seen some games where it's been like really low scoring, but overall it's given, I think, people more of a chance to take a little bit more gambles here and there. Not like all ins all the time, but you could take a few more risks for shots and whatnot, because if you die, you have more time to come back, and losing control once isn't the end of the round or whatever. Like you could potentially get it back again. So yeah, but I think overall in terms of pro play, time limit duel was much healthier, much better to spectate and everything. But I don't necessarily mind that they tried to do the round duel. Right. They tried something different. I think from a casual perspective, like if you just queue up to play, round duel was a bit better for that than time limit for ranked, for example. But for matches and competing, time limit is second to none in terms of duel. It's just you can't fix what ain't broke in that regard as far as duel is concerned. But yeah, and I think the other thing that made it a little nicer sometimes is like, let's say like streaming, because you watch some of these games that people stream and like variety streaming and stuff, games where you have a bit of a pause to explain things to people or to talk to people, it does make it feel more interactive. Right. And round did do that, because you die at the end of the round and you have like 15 to 20 seconds before it starts. So it's time to like break it down for people, like what went wrong, what could you have done differently, or like just kind of say out loud, like, okay, I think he's going to do this, so I'm going to try to do this, and let's see if it works. And it feels more interactive, whereas time limit, you are fully focused in the whole time. Like it's really, really hard to step out when you're playing at the highest level. Like if I'm playing a player like, like mid to high tier, yeah, I can do that. But if I'm playing the guys in the QPL, it's really hard to do that when streaming and like teach people on the fly like what they should be doing. That's for sure.
Yeah, if no one ever saw Rapha stream, most of the time he only talks where it's like to complain about a shot missing or something. Like, it sounds like you just all did. Yeah, I agree. What about
event somehow?
Absolutely. Everyone needs a support network, and mine is, of course, my Patreon community, the Scrominati, who in many ways, they're the Sonny to my Cher, saying, I got you, babe. So this video and all the others on my channel were kindly supported by the following names: Ahmed Hadju, Matt Pugnaccio Rakula, Adam Tomlin, Animosity, Jensen Go, Tosh, Toucan, and you know it. Jerky's Minion, my main man, always going to be referenced, one of the best patrons of all time. Would you like to ask a question in my AMA? Maybe you want to suggest a topic or a guest to say on my channel? Do you want teasers? Find out who the upcoming Reflections and Talk to Thorin interviews are. Maybe you want to do one of those long discussions where you get to set the topics we talk about. Well, if any of these or others appeal to you, put your money where your mouth is. Join the Scluminati today via the Patreon link in the description box below.